Hello. This is Vincent Anderson coming to you once again, and NLM 572. This is my Freire project conversation. The participant that I chose for my project is actually my father. I wanted to more so gain a better understanding and gain greater ideas of how the issues between the African American community and the police departments across the country can be mitigated and eventually eradicated. So I spoke with my father, who is coming up on his, I believe, around his 30th year of service as a police officer. He's a captain on the police force in East St. Louis, Illinois. So I figured he would be an expert that I could actually utilize some pretty good insight from. I'm going to utilize five key principles that Freire mentions and talks about regarding leadership and change. Um, so first and foremost, Freire talks about the emphasis on dialogue. Now, when you're talking about the African American community and police agencies across the country, dialogue, I believe, is definitely the starting point. It's the most important, vital portion to get to a place to where these issues again can begin to resolve themselves. Um, Freire talks about how years of disregarding oppressed people's humanity has influenced the creation and maintenance of social and institutional structures that limit and denigrate. I think that hits the nail on the head when you're talking about um, tax-paying citizens who make it possible for police officers to make a living and feed themselves and their families. I think that it's important to be willing to listen. Um, in the everyday society work environment, I don't believe many employees would go to their bosses and tell them what they expect from them without actually listening to what their boss has to say, the one who actually pays their salary. So, again, when you're talking about the African American citizens connecting with the police departments, it's important. And I think that both sides have to come together, as Freire goes on to discuss. It has to be openly, humbly, willing to listen. It has to be out of love. I don't believe that you can have an effective law enforcement administration when you don't have love. If you don't have love for the community that you're policing, I believe that you're going to look at them as a threat, kind of like our soldiers when they go overseas to war. It's kind of like that same mentality. You're overseas at war, and you see threats and you eliminate threats. And I believe that that's the same mentality that's kind of been adopted. It's a quasi, in a sense, it's been quasi adopted by American police agencies regarding minority populations due to an implicitly biased media who portrays African Americans and other people of color egregious rates of being criminals and so on and so forth, which are highly misleading and dangerous. So dialogue is very important as the first step. Secondly is praxis, which is action that is informed. When you're talking about action that is informed, I believe that community policing leads the way. This is action that is certainly informed by results, actual quantifiable results from communities where I myself, and again, talking with my father, he was mentioning how community policing is going on currently in St. Louis right now, and I know some people who are working for police agencies in St. Louis, Missouri, and they're actually experiencing a great deal of success and a great response from community members and business owners and so on and so forth as they get out of their police cruisers and they're willing to walk around and engage and establish rapport and connect with community members. So it takes it a step further than dialogue. So I think that that's something that's pretty important. Also, to go back to my creative theory of miseducation theory, I think that a lot of our law enforcement members are miseducated, again, through forms of media, what have you, whether in media social circles or however someone was raised with their epistemic values and so on and so forth. So I believe that that has a great impact as well in how we see things playing out between the community, African American community, and police agencies across the country. The next step is naming the world, which is communication through the participant's language. I think, again, both sides have to be willing to listen, but I think that more importantly, police officers and police agencies have to be willing to listen to citizens and actually sit down and understand their language. Sometimes our education levels aren't the same. Sometimes, bottom line, our culture isn't the same. So we want to have the ability to sit down and understand one another, and we cannot do that again if we cannot take the time to get out of our police cruisers and walk around and understand the community that you're being paid to police and actually serve and protect, not hunt down and eliminate. So it's definitely going to be important to understand how people are speaking, and that's something that my father champions a great deal as well. Next is the education based off of their lived experiences. When you're talking about the African American community being the most incarcerated community in America, I think that you have to be willing to apply some educational tools and actually gain some knowledge. And I think that a great learning tool is the 13th documentary, which was produced by Ava DuVernay. It's available on Netflix. I believe it still is. A very powerful documentary which talks about the 13th Amendment and how slavery in America was never abolished. It just took another name. The 13th Amendment, in Articles of Amendment to the Constitution, it states that slavery is still permissible as a form of punishment. So it just undertook another name, which was evident in the convict leasing system and so on and so forth. I think that it's important, and it helps also for the police officers to understand how police departments really came about in America. The first police establishment was formed to protect property, and that property were enslaved Africans. So their job was to chase down enslaved Africans when they attempted to escape. So when you're talking about that, the root of the system of how it actually what has been since its inception, I think that you have to understand the long history of it. And the 13th does a good job of explaining that as well. Also, Hidden Colors, I think that was a great documentary as well. It talks about just the African presence around the world. It was the #1 documentary on Amazon for a while. So I think that would be good. Also, the Theater of the Oppressed. After doing the research on the article and applying Freire's concepts, I think that that is another way that community members can convey their messages, have the ability to articulate exactly how they feel and the treatment that they expect from the law enforcement agencies that they're paying to protect them. And also my father, he suggested visiting police academies and training facilities. I myself had the opportunity to do so out here in Phoenix, to visit the police training facility. I believe it was in South Mountain, actually somewhere in the mountain. So I went and I got a great understanding. I had an opportunity to dialogue with police officers and gain a better understanding of exactly how they're being trained, what's being instilled into their minds when they're going out into the streets and so on and so forth. So again, it's going to take balance, that education based off of lived experiences. How can both sides see through the eyes of one another to actually make this thing, begin the healing process? So, and the 5th step is the use of Christian metaphors. For this one, I refer to the book of Matthew, chapter 11, verse 15, and it states that he that hath ears to hear, let him hear, which basically means if you have ears to hear, you should listen. And I think that it's extremely applicable for both sides to sit down and actually listen to one another. Communication is the key to any successful relationship. If you can't communicate, without effective communication, your relationship is doomed. I don't care if it's business, personal, whatever that you want to call it. It's doomed to fail. So there has to be some resolve. There has to be love, as Freire talked about, with the emphasis on dialogue. There has to be community policing. There has to be action of people interacting and engaging with each other through the praxis step, naming the world, understanding the language of the oppressed in the African American community, education based off of lived experiences. Again, those educational tools can help, and also, again, understanding the training techniques that the police officers are undergoing, and then also the use of Christian metaphor. Everybody should open those ears. We were given one mouth, two ears. I think that it's for a reason. So sometimes we just have to zip it up and open our ears, and we could actually, again, begin to see that the people that we're connecting with aren't so different. Again, when you talk about Black Lives Matter, Blue Lives Matter, so on and so forth, the difference is you're born black. You're not born into a blue uniform. You're raised and you're taught certain things, and you learn certain things, and then you put on that uniform, and then you carry out whatever biases or prejudices that you have, because we all have them. So that's a false equivalency that has to be debunked. So again, it can only happen if we sit down and talk as human beings, one on one. It doesn't matter our racial backgrounds and so on and so forth, but we have to get a greater understanding. So this is what my father and I were able to come up with. I asked a lot of questions. It was a great conversation, but I hope that you guys can appreciate it and provide me some good feedback from it. So again, it's Vincent Anderson. This is my Freire project. Thank you.